Hi Lisa,
Hello.
thank you so much for joining us today. We just have a couple of questions for you. We asked some school students here in Brisbane to ask some questions that they really wanted to know about your research and your experiences as a physicist. So, you ready?
I don't know. We'll find out.
So the first one is a pretty big one actually. How do you think we're going to make progress on questions such as dark energy and dark matter, and how quantum physics and gravity should combine?
That's kind of an all-inclusive question. So they're different questions, first of all. So I think the way I'm less certain how we'll make progress on dark energy, to be frank. But dark matter, I think there's a lot of really interesting observations going on today. And the kind of research I'm doing today especially has to do with finding models, which are kind of targets for what we can look for, and asking what would be the consequence if dark matter looked a particular way. In other words, if dark matter interacted a certain way, how would that affect the structures of galaxies, dwarf galaxies, distributions? It's not an easy problem, as you know. I mean, there's a lot of astronomical unknowns that are going into things. But we're getting so much data today that a combination of using this kind of particle physics-based model building approach to see, like, what is it that's there that's not predicted? I think we really have some chance of making progress on that.
That's really exciting. One of the things that I've always been curious about is when you're doing building these models, how do you choose what's the most promising model to pursue? There's a wealth of opportunities or things that you could choose to study. So how do you pick?
Well, as I'm not an observer, I don't have to pick. I can work on several different models, and in fact, I do. Of course, there are some guidelines for what I think are interesting, and I'll try to build them up systematically, figure out, is there some major ingredient that's been lost, and especially one that might have significant observational consequences, like the one I talked about in dark matter and the dinosaurs, is thinking maybe some fraction of the dark matter interacts much more strongly than the rest of it. It doesn't mean that has to be the case, but it has such dramatically different observational consequences and structure consequences that, of course, it's worth pursuing.
Yeah.
Because, we'll be able to learn more about it.
Yeah.
So I like to find things like that, or something that really solves a problem, like in warp passages. I describe why I looked at an extra dimension as a way of solving a problem about the weakness of gravity. So, something that's, the best models are something that has some big new idea in it with some dramatically different consequences.
Yeah. That's a great great segue actually, because one of the other student questions was exactly about what attracted you to studying extra dimensions.
Well, it's funny. I joke about it even in warp passages too. Like, if someone had told me I'd be working on that, I would have been like, "You're crazy," because I try to, focus. Basically, I try to focus on theories that I think are realistic. I mean, that's another aspect. Sometimes some, student or postdoc will present a theory, and I'm like, do you really think the world is like that? The world's like that. I'll shoot myself. It's like, but it's not, it's a joke. If it illustrates a new phenomena, that's fine. And sometimes they'll say that. They'll say, look, I know this is a complicated model, but it illustrates some other things, so we'll try to pare it down. In the case of solving this question about the weakness of gravity, it's been this major problem for years. Another way of phrasing it is why the Higgs boson mass is what it is. And physicists have worked on it for decades, and there really was no completely satisfactory solution. So when we came across an idea that worked with a warped extra dimension of space, and especially because extra dimensions, there's no reason they can't be there. That is to say, these dimensions beyond the three we know about, left, right, forward, backward, up, down. They can be there, but they have to be hidden, and we found ways they could be hidden. And they might actually solve problems. So again, that's why we're led there.
Yeah. So this is a good opportunity actually. Your model, how does it solve the problem of why gravity is so much weaker than the other forces?
Well, it's because gravity varies quite a bit as you go across the extra dimension. And this wasn't something we made up. We accidentally found it. We were trying to solve some other problem, and we just solved Einstein's equations, the theory of gravity, in the presence of ingredients known as branes, these wall-like objects that can exist in higher dimensions, for example, or lower dimensions. And we found that when you solved it, you found that gravity varied in some sense exponentially as you go from one brane to the other, which means that even if you're a modest distance away from the brane where gravity is concentrated, you could find very weak gravity.
Cool. So this concept of brains, that might be unfamiliar to some people. Do you
Yeah,
wanna go into
that's
that
what I'm
a little
saying.
bit
It's
more?
like, well, the idea is that even if there's an extra dimension of space, you might have some lower dimensional surface where things are stuck. So I mean, I kind of joke like a shower curtain in a bathroom, so
Yeah.
water droplets will stay just on the curtain. So even though there's 3 dimensions, in principle they could travel, they're really only traveling on the 2-dimensional surface.
So another question I have here is, why are quantum physics and gravity incompatible?
They're actually not incompatible, as you know. I mean, we use quantum physics and gravity all the time. Where they are, however, incompatible at very, very tiny distances, very tiny energies. At those scales, so usually you use either quantum mechanics or relativity, one steps aside for the other, and it's fine, and there's no problem. But there are these scales where both would, in principle, play a role. And in that case, we don't know how to make computations. So I want to be very clear. We do trust quantum mechanics, and we do trust gravity.
Yeah.
It's just that we think there's some underlying theory that will apply at these very high energies or very, very tiny distances.
Yeah. So that underlying theory will hopefully explain how they become compatible at those low in the situations.
Well,
where
if it's the right
two-
theory, you'll be able to derive both quantum mechanics and relativity. Kind of the way we think about Newtonian physics now. I mean, we know there's an underlying theory of quantum mechanics, but we know that in most regimes, or even an underlying theory of special relativity at very high speeds, but it will reduce to the physics we're familiar with at familiar scales.
So it sounds like the process of deciding on what models you want to test, etc., is a very creative process. And that's something that one of the other students asked is, what is
I love
the...
your segues.
Yeah, what is the role of creativity in physics?
Different people do different types of physics. I think ultimately if you want to solve big problems, you generally have to be creative. That doesn't mean you just make stuff up. I mean, it means you understand very deeply what's going on. You understand some of the essential elements and how they might combine together and how some new ingredient might come into play. So you have to be willing to play around, but you also have to be steeped in the solid stuff of what's there.
I think that's really important. You can be creative from a very solid foundation.
Exactly.
So you understand
That's a
what
nice way
came
of
before.
putting it. Right.
It's like being a painter or an artist, I suppose.
Right, where you want to know the tools of
You've got the tools, the techniques, and once you've got that, then you can be truly creative.
I think that's right.
Yeah. Excellent. Let me see, what else did they have here? Oh, this was a good one, I thought. This was from the teachers. They said, as high school teachers, how do we explain the ideas behind string theory to our students?
Why are they explaining the ideas behind string theory?
That's a good question then. Should we be explaining ideas of string theory to their students?
I mean, I think it's good to inspire students. String theory sounds like an exotic concept, but it's actually very hard to understand what it's really about. And I'm not sure you learn so much because it's so far removed from what you can actually process. I mean, it's nice to know it in sort of a cultural way.
Yeah.
The way I know people will speak a different language, but I don't know that language. But I think there are probably places where people can more get a grip on it. And I think, this is part of the dichotomy in how people present science. One is just like, wow, this is really cool. You'll just think this is cool. And the other is like, here's how you solve a problem. Like, this is how you go about it. And I like things that are at least touching on that, where you could at least really begin to understand, rather than people just telling you, like, this is what you have to do this. But and I think there are more tangible things that might be more appropriate to be teaching high school students.
Very good point. So finally, what do you think of the competitors to string theory and other theories?
I don't know that much. I mean, really, none of the theories are completely explaining the questions we want to know the answer to. I mean, there's some aspects of string theories that work, but string theory isn't even a complete theory. There's M theory underlying it. So, I mean, I think the fact is we don't know the answer now. I mean, string theory will probably be part of whatever is the theory, but it's not the final answer because there's too much missing from. I mean, whatever it is can be defined as string theory, but that's not the same as saying it's what we know now.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Good,
for your
thank
time,
you. That was
Lisa.
fun.